I want to thank you for joining us in the fifth segment of Food Tank's webinar series. We've had a lot of incredible and amazing speakers over the last few months, and today's webinar is really no exception. I'm excited and thrilled to introduce our friends from AVRDC, the World Vegetable Center, which is based in Taiwan. With us today, we have Dyno Keatinge, who's the Director General. We have Jacqueline Hughes, who's the Deputy Director General for Research. And we have Hughes Yang, who is an AVRDC nutritionist. And they're joining us tonight to talk about the need for dietary diversity and in investing in vegetables worldwide. I'm incredibly honored to have them with us. They've been great partners to Food Tank and to me personally, and I'm grateful that they'll be sharing their expertise with us all tonight, or this morning in their case. The webinar will be recorded. We'll be taking questions for about 10 or 15 minutes, and you can follow us on Twitter at #food. So AVRDC, I'm going to give it over to you now. Thank you again for agreeing to participate. We're really, really honored to have you.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Danielle. Welcome to all Food Tank friends to AVRDC, the World Vegetable Center. We're an international agricultural research institute with a mandate for tropical and subtropical vegetables and their improvement. And it is our intention to try to abolish hunger and malnutrition in the coming years, and it's something that we're working very hard to achieve. We are particularly concerned about malnutrition when it comes to young women. We believe that this is one of the keys for abolishing malnutrition, is to try to make sure that young women get good diets well before they get married and well before they get pregnant, because the intergenerational transfer of malnutrition from mother to fetus is one of the major problems in the developing world, and we therefore believe that young women deserve the best food in the family, and that's perhaps a message you didn't expect to receive. And there are now new targets for all of the international centers. We are now responding to what is called the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 2. Jackie Hughes, my deputy behind me here, was helping in the committee to try to decide what it is that the UN would have as their Sustainable Development Goal on hunger and malnutrition. And as you can see on the screen, many of these things are appropriate, shifting towards healthier diets, preserving biodiversity in the environment, and certainly reducing food losses and waste, and empowering women are many of the things in which we are heavily involved in AVRDC's research, and in which you'll see a little bit more during this particular presentation. One of the things that we are concerned with is the current trend that's happening worldwide of people shifting from what had been traditional diets to rather more westernized food. This is probably a bad thing in the long run, particularly if young people are eating more food high in saturated fats and sugars, and eating less and less fruit and vegetables. In addition, taking less physical activity. All of things combined are poor for health, and it's something that we would like to act as a counterbalancing weight in the world at present. Now, we all know, probably here in this webinar, that you have to eat 400 grams of fruit and vegetables a day in order to have a nutritious diet, to have healthy children, and to make sure that your households and yourselves are resilient. The question is, do you know what 400 grams of fruit and vegetables looks like? And if you look at this particular slide, you will see 200 grams of fruit and 200 grams of vegetables, and it all adds up approximately to the weight of a World Cup football. Now, unfortunately, most people in the world don't eat the 400 grams of fruit and vegetables a day, and as a result, things like IQ are compromised, and also adult's ability to work and to earn is reduced by having a malnourished state. And more seriously than that, perhaps, that if you're in a situation in which you're in a country where vegetable availability is poor, and if it falls below 200 grams a day, you can see from this particular graph that infant mortality of children under 5 rises rapidly as vegetable availability falls. And it's not just mortality, unfortunately, but it's also reductions in IQ, stunting in height, and various other things associated with an underweight condition. So vegetables are extremely important for maintaining your health, and particularly important for children as well. One of the things that we try to get a strong message across to the world is currently the problem of post-harvest waste of, not in agricultural commodities in general, but in vegetables and fruits in particular. It's a plain fact that in most of the developing world, the post-harvest management of vegetables and fruits is very poor. And as you can see in the picture with me, that in the Sahel, just laying capsicums out on the ground and hoping the sun will dry them well enough is not really an acceptable situation. But it's so common that we are very concerned that maybe 20, 30, 40, even 50% of vegetables are lost between the field and when the consumer has them, and not only in terms of quantity but in terms of quality. So it's very important that we spend a substantial amount of our effort in trying now to do better post-harvest management of such commodities within the context of the developing world. And I think it's fair to say that most people here in Taiwan and also people in the US don't appreciate how lucky they are to live in a situation in which there is tremendous infrastructure supporting the horticultural industry. And so when you go to the supermarket, you can buy fresh, well-preserved goods which are clean and wholesome, and that's not always the case in many other countries. And then the issue of vegetables. Not all vegetables are equal, like not all human beings are equal. And if you look at this particular chart, you can see that both tomato and Savoy cabbage in this particular case are in fact not very nutrient dense at all. It may come as a surprise for you to learn that tomato is not a very useful vegetable to you per se, whereas many of the traditional or indigenous vegetables such as cowpea or amaranth or jute mallow are in fact extremely nutrient dense, filled with vitamin A and vitamin C and other minerals, and we need to try to encourage people to put these types of leafy greens into their diet in order to be able to deal with the requirement for these vitamins and minerals in our daily lives. And you can see in the case of rice, other than carbohydrate, it really doesn't give you very much at all, and this is true for most of the other staples. Let's also try not to forget the pulse crops like chickpea and pigeon pea and mung bean. They are also important components of the diet. They produce useful proteins and also some good vitamins and minerals. And if you look, for example, in Africa, then there's a whole range of different indigenous and traditional vegetables which we are trying to develop now so that they can be exploited by a large proportion of the population. African eggplant, not the purple one that you might expect, but either white or green or orange. And many of the leafy green crops like Ethiopian mustard or African nightshade and jute mallow are all extremely important for providing vitamin A's and vitamin C and other things for people here in East Africa. And this is true the world over, and you will see in the supermarket picture on the left, this is taken in Nairobi, and many African consumers from urban environments are very keen to be able to get hold of leafy green vegetables because they understand that this is a benefit to them. The African eggplant below DB3, which is an AVRDC variety, is now one of the highest money earners for vegetable growers in Tanzania. The yellow tomato you can see is also an AVRDC biofortified tomato. That means that we've sought a tomato with very high vitamin A content. And you have to understand that if you want high vitamin A in tomato, then you have to have an orange or yellow tomato. You can't have a red one. If you have a red tomato, you get access to lycopene, but you get no vitamin A at all. And in the bottom picture, you can see Hibiscus sabdorifer, roselle, which is a very important source of vitamin C, particularly as it can be preserved in squashes and sweets and other ways of preserving things, particularly in Sahel, and allows children then to have vitamin C throughout the year, whereas currently they tend to have lots of vitamin C during the mango season and not much else. And we believe that home gardens are a very important component of making sure that women can help feed their families appropriately. And we believe that by encouraging people to grow home gardens with a good diversity of vegetables in them, particularly these nutrient-dense vegetables, then women have a better chance of making sure that their children grow up to be healthy and they themselves and their husbands get appropriate diets. However, when you have vegetables at home, it's also very important to know how to cook them. If you take a leafy green vegetable and just boil it for 2 hours, you may in fact lose most of the nutrition that's associated with it. So having some knowledge of nutrition and its interaction with cooking methods is extremely important. Home economics, which is a dying discipline in many universities, I believe to be a very important one, and one which we need now to bring back as best as we can do to make sure that people understand the linkage between what they buy in the supermarkets and what in fact does them benefit once they consume them. Here's an example of that most girls in South Asia suffer from iron deficiency, and yet they eat mung bean dal pretty well every day, perhaps not in huge quantity, but they do eat it. Now, unfortunately, in the ways it can be cooked, just boiled, much of the very rich qualities of mung bean, which is high in iron and zinc, is not in fact bioavailable to them and just passes through their bodies. But if you can cook mung bean with a little oil and some acidic vegetable like tomato or Chinese cabbage, then you have a chance of either doubling or tripling the bioavailability of iron in that mung bean for teenage girls, and that can make a very substantial difference to their health. Where do you get seeds of these rather exotic crops? Well, there are several options. You can try your farmer's market. You can try your normal seed retailer. Some of them may be able to sell some of these slightly different vegetables. But we hold the world's largest public sector collection of vegetable germplasm. We have about 60,000 accessions now of 436 different species. That is in the public domain. If you wish to get seed from us, it is possible by consulting our website. You will only get a very small quantity, but it is up to you then to bulk up those seeds. But they are available to you, and they are available to all seed producers and private sector and public sector seed agencies. Malnutrition also means that you can have an imbalanced diet, and if you have too much carbohydrate in your diet and also too much fats and oils, then you run the risk of becoming obese quite quickly. This is almost epidemic in South Asia, in India, also in China, and there's a very great difficulty now with childhood obesity. This has major consequences for your health, as type 2 diabetes is very commonly associated with anybody who has a very high body mass index. And we believe that one of the vegetables that we can deal with which might be able to help in this situation is one called bitter gourd. And this vegetable is very popular in India and China currently, in fact throughout Southeast Asia, and is heavily consumed in a whole series of different ways. It's not very palatable to westernized tastes, but when cooked properly in either Chinese or in Indian type cuisine, In fact, it can be a very palatable vegetable, and one which is filled not only with the standard vitamins and minerals, but also has medicinal qualities which help reduce blood sugars and to help the efficiency of use of insulin in the body, which is extremely important if you're pre-diabetic or potentially diabetic. So if you can encourage people that have such problems not only to eat a balanced diet with enough vegetables, but one which includes bitter gourd, can be a very positive benefit. And we believe that horticulture also helps in trying to eliminate poverty, and we understand that it's all very well to be well nourished, but if that's all you have and you have no money, then life is not necessarily very satisfactory. But we believe that by adopting a horticultural approach to agriculture, then this can be of great benefit to women specifically, because many of them are the home gardeners, and it is usual that if you have a home garden, you can produce more than you can consume, and therefore there will be some vegetables available for sale, and therefore any money which we can put into women's hands is usually well spent, as it can also buy additional foods, ones which you're unable to get in the household. And we believe this is a very positive fact. If you compare fruit and vegetable production with rice or maize production, you're going to get a significantly higher income from a small amount of land. And not only income increases with fruit and vegetables rather than staple cereals, in fact what we provide is a whole series of additional jobs that are associated with horticultural production, which are a tremendous benefit to particularly the landless poor. And we believe that if you have large amounts of surplus labor, then to have a horticultural industry that's thriving helps mop up much of that surplus, and does not only just produce jobs at sowing time and harvest time as it does in rice, but also produces those jobs throughout the year, because many of the vegetables allow for value addition. That means improvement in packing houses, in preservation, in a whole range of other different ways in which vegetables can have their value improved, and in which women can participate and have permanent jobs in order to be able to achieve the market goals. And likewise, if you're a politician or a decision maker and you want to try to develop your rural infrastructure, it's not much point in then stimulating the staple cereal industry, because most rice is traded over the farm gate. It doesn't require markets necessarily, it doesn't require cool facilities, it doesn't require large amounts of transport or other labor. But we believe that if you have a thriving horticultural sector in your environment, then you have every chance of commercializing the rural economy to a much greater extent. Infrastructure is developed, markets are created, supermarkets follow fresh vegetable markets, and then you can have quite a large proportion of population with additional jobs and with additional development for the whole rural infrastructure. Now, agricultural research is something that plays a role in your life, I think perhaps a bigger role than you might expect. We at AVRDC spend much of our time trying to produce new genetic material which is resistant to a whole range of diseases, insects and viruses and other things. One of the things that people don't understand is that as we're sitting here watching this webinar, then viruses outside in the field and diseases are changing and mutating, and insects are also changing themselves. So therefore they continuously challenge existing varieties of vegetables and other crops, and therefore we have to keep pace with their development in order to make sure that the sorts of fruits and vegetables that you like to have in the market are available to you at a cheap enough price. Vegetables are relatively expensive, and one of the reasons for that is that in fact most agricultural research money is in fact given to maize, wheat and rice, and very little of it filters down into vegetables, which I believe to be a mistake, but it is something that AVRDC is constantly sounding off about, and we would like you to understand that it's important to have good agricultural research in horticulture as well as in the staple commodities. And the example here in Tanzania, about 25 years ago, AVRDC was involved in breeding new varieties for the East African market and produced two varieties, Tanya, which is a tomato used for the processing industry, and Tanguru 97, which is a fresh market tomato. Now these two varieties dominate the East African market currently, and you can see in the picture of the wholesale market in Arusha that they are now produced in large quantity, but unfortunately they're still produced and sold in these rather rough wooden boxes, which I will deal with in a minute, which seriously damage the crop and make transport difficult. But in a recent visit to Dash Industries, which is the main tomato paste and tomato ketchup producer in Arusha in Tanzania, we were told that the amount of tomato paste available on the market is much less than what is required. And in fact, 70% of the tomato paste used for the ketchup industry in Tanzania is imported from China. So it shows you that, in fact, much more agricultural research is now needed in East African countries in order to boost local production, because it makes no sense to me to bring tomato paste from China all the way to Tanzania to turn it into tomato ketchup. And I believe that the opportunities now for African growers to grow much more tomatoes, particularly of the Tanya type, it's an opportunity which we need now to exploit to the greatest extent possible. And one of the things that we have to teach our farmers is to be gentle with their crops. Post-harvest management of crops is something that is not well understood in East Africa, and that the people who harvest the crop are not then have the responsibility for selling at the other end. So they tend to bang them into these wooden boxes, shove them on a truck, and by the time they reach the market, they can have tomato juice in most of the box. So to be able to understand the lessons about grading, about stacking them in aerated containers like this red plastic box, how to harvest them properly, how to be more gentle, and to grade them properly and to do good packing are basic lessons you would have thought that everybody would have understood already. But in most developing country farmers in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, and in East and West Africa, these lessons have to be taught, and they're not well understood by farmers and the laborers who help with the harvest. And so I believe that training becomes a very important component of the types of activities that we do at AVRDC. And then much of what I've said is undermined if farmers in fact spray insecticide to a very large extent on their crop, particularly close to harvest time. Making sure that crops are in fact wholesome and not having large quantities of pesticide residue is a very important issue for AVRDC. We have a whole series of integrated pest management approaches which help farmers reduce the amount of insecticide they use, and in particular crops like eggplant, which are very produced with some difficulty because of the eggplant fruit and shoot borer in Southeast Asia. People have been known to spray to 50 to 150 times in this long season that eggplants have. That's bad for the farm family because they're using sprays all the time. It's bad for profitability, and it's bad for the consumer. And we believe that good research in this area can cut the amount of pesticide used very substantially, but it requires good science and good agricultural extension to get that message out into the community. And the small purple handbook on the right of my picture here is AVRDC's probably most popular publication. I don't know how many thousands we've produced in all a range of different languages in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, and many other places. And that helps farmers to adopt integrated pest management approaches and much reduces their use of pesticide. And sadly also, no matter how well vegetables are produced in the field, a common sight before markets is farmers in fact washing their vegetables in contaminated water. Now, this is something that we seek to educate them to avoid, because it's very important to us that when people buy leafy green vegetables in the market, that this is a wholesome and healthy product. But very often they become contaminated just before market, or while they're on display, then the market holders will flick dirty water over them, and this is something that good education can be avoided. And also, if clean water is available on farm before these things go to the market, then it's very possible to avoid many of the consequences of worm eggs, of bacteria, and a whole range of other different complexities by treating vegetables with good clean water beforehand. Then you have a good chance to get a wholesome product to market. What of the future then? We have to worry here in Shanghua in Taiwan, because it appears from the graph below that we are potentially increasing our average air temperature by more than 4 degrees centigrade per 100 years. This is one of the sort of nightmare scenarios of the IPCC, the sort of world gurus of climate change, but we are clearly showing a very rapid increase here. That may not be true at other locations, but certainly here we have this particular issue. Now, strangely, I'm much less concerned about the actual effect of heat on vegetables per se, in that in fact many of them are quite heat tolerant. Pumpkin, for example. But tomato is less heat tolerant and capsicum is less heat tolerant, and we need to build additional heat tolerance into those vegetables in order to make them available and for good growth in these particular environments. But the more worrying dimension is that if you have a warmer environment, then you're also going to get more generations of whiteflies, more generations of bacteria multiplying, more generations of viruses changing, and that additional heat has a much perhaps greater effect on the pest population that affect vegetables than perhaps the effect of heat itself on vegetables. So we need to make sure that we understand what sort of global warming we can expect in 15 or 20 years' time, and to start to build in those additional amounts of resistance to the key pests and diseases like tomato yellow leaf curl virus, which is spread by whiteflies, or tospo viruses, tomato spotted wilt virus, which is spread by thrips. We need to understand the interaction between the temperatures that we're going to experience and the likely impact of those on the various insect, disease, and viral populations. And if we don't understand that, then we're going to be caught, and we will then suddenly have a virus or a disease or an insect problem that we don't have an answer to, and then you'll find that prices rise very rapidly in the shops for whatever particular vegetable that may or may not affect. So this is my last slide. I'd like to say thanks very much indeed to Food Tank and all of its allies in helping us to get our message across. We have a mandate here at AVRDC, which is prosperity for the poor and health for all, and I believe that to be a good mantra for anybody involved in vegetable growing. And I wish you all well, and I wish you also have properly balanced diets and long, healthy lives. Thank you very much indeed.
Great, Dyno. That was a really wonderful overview of the very important work that AVRDC is doing. The first question from our listeners is around the issue of food waste and food loss that you alluded to. And you talked a little bit about how AVRDC is working with farmers. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that and talk about how you work to not only help farmers preserve these very perishable crops, but how you encourage eaters to utilize them, because sometimes when vegetable crops are dried or preserved in unfamiliar ways, it can be hard to get people to eat them. So can you talk a little bit about how AVRDC works with farmers and eaters alike to encourage more consumption of sort of unfamiliar vegetable products?
Fine. Certainly I can answer that question. I'm going to let Jackie talk to about the consumption part of the particular question. As for preservation, we have a large training component of many of the different geographic locations which AVRDC is operating in. We're looking at ways of solar drying, of zero energy cooling, of modified atmosphere packaging, of a whole range of different small-scale interventions for improving preservation of vegetables, not only in terms of their quantity but also of their quality. And usually it's a question of, can you reduce water loss? Can you get vegetables to be cool rather than left out in the sun? And it's very often in the market situation the traders leave them out into the sun without any sort of shade. And the whole range of different small things in terms of packing, in terms of grading, which AVRDC can help them with, which we try to get across. Very often in this particular case we have partners at the University of California, Davis, who are working in the Innovation Lab for Horticulture, and they're helping us very much with our post-harvest training components, and we receive generous funding from the US government for helping in that particular area. Jackie, can you deal with the consumption side?
Absolutely. We have a lot of traditional vegetables from around the world, and we do try to introduce vegetables that are adapted to different regions, but you can't just put new vegetables into new regions. Apart from the agronomic issues, there's also local cultural and well, family issues. Do families want to eat those new vegetables? So we take these new vegetables in, we work with farmers, with families, make sure the farmers are happy to grow them. Agronomically, we know they would grow, but the farmers have to be fairly happy growing them and understand how to grow them. Then we work with the families, with the women, with the kids, and try and understand the cultural issues. Let them adapt recipes that we know work, and let them develop the recipes that meet their own tastes. It's very important to have the families involved with this adaptation of the recipes to make sure that the families, particularly the kids, will then enjoy eating the vegetables.
Great, thank you for that clear explanation. That's really helpful. Our next question is the following. The listener asks, the utilization of biodiversity for climate resilience and dietary diversity makes a tremendous amount of sense, but that utilization is predicated on behavioral change related to both cropping systems and diets. And there's not a lot of explanation of that in the literature. So the question is, how do we operationalize the dietary diversification agenda? That's a mouthful.
I will try to start to answer that question, and then Ray, you will come in and she'll say a little bit about bitter gourd, which is one of the crops that we are trying to introduce to other people. It's true that we function in a biodiverse situation. We want people to eat a wide range of fruit and vegetables, and it requires them to change their behaviors often. We believe that one of the ways we can bring this about more easily is to aim, first of all, at the younger element in the community. So we have a whole series of school gardens, for example, and programs working with teachers to try to get younger children to take on board the idea that vegetables are good for them. If they grow them themselves, then we have no difficulty in persuading them to eat those vegetables afterwards. And we believe that's also a good way of getting vegetables back to their parents by producing seed from the vegetable school gardens and taking them home. Then we have an opportunity to also develop the home gardens with their mothers and grandmothers. So we believe that if you can target the right audience in the first place, you have a good chance of, in fact, getting people to change their behavior. And we do have examples, for example, in northeastern India, where we've introduced vegetable soybean. This is a vegetable they'd never seen before, had never been grown in the environment, particularly in tribal communities. And yet this has taken off in a huge way, and there's now several 100,000 hectares of vegetable soybean being grown. And we didn't dictate to them how they should eat the vegetable soybean. Here in East Asia, it's usually taken as a salted snack with beer, but in northeastern India, they're making it as dal, which they like because they particularly like the edamame taste of the soybean. And so if you allow people to experiment with these things, help them to develop recipes, guide them on what is an appropriate way of making sure they're cooked properly, then you have every chance of being able to change diets in a way which is of value to people's health. Rayu?
Yeah, for the behavior change, I think it's very important not only the knowledge or the education. It also we need to kind of let people have the can be motivated and also have the incentives to eat more vegetables or eat more diverse food. So, for example, is that like nightshades that when we promote the African local vegetables, and then also enhance the image of the local traditional the leafy vegetables that can associate it with their culture. And for example, that we promote the bitter gourd, that especially for the health benefits, bitter gourd is not only eaten like indicated in Dyno's presentation. It's not only vegetables, and also kind of medicinal vegetables that can provide the health benefits, especially that have the potential to reduce the high blood sugar. And also for a lot of the lower income families that they grow vegetables in the home or the backyard, that can also increase some income opportunities. So there are many, I think it's many different ways that we have to kind of not just promote the message itself, and also very important to enhance the incentive and motivate them.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what is AVRDC's approach to identifying and securing indigenous vegetable seeds? So I think they're asking, how do you get the seeds that you're working with farmers to grow and to produce in greater quantities?
Well, that's really a fairly simple question to answer. We make collections of indigenous vegetable seeds from whatever gene banks we're operating with throughout the world. We usually launch joint collection missions for wild relatives with the countries concerned. There's an amount of fairly comprehensive documentation and permissions that are required, but those have been done in the past and will be done in the future. We visit local markets, we collect seeds from there, and so in East Africa, for example, we now have by far the largest collection of indigenous vegetable seeds from African sources, somewhere around 4,000 to 5,000 different types of seeds, and those are then made available to all farmers, all ministry employees, all seed companies who would like access to those seeds. So there are rules that have to be followed. The International Plant Genetic Resources Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources of Food and Agriculture have clear rules about the transfer of germplasm and its acquisition, and we are following those rules to the letter.
Great, thank you for that. The next question is about home gardens, and this listener agrees that home gardens are a great way to maintain nutrition for families, and so that families can eat what they're producing. But she points out that as lives are getting busier, a lot of people don't have time to take care of their gardens, and she would like to know about the vegetables and fruits that require less care and are more resilient to pests and disease.
Right, well, I'll start that one. Jackie, would you like to also have a go? For me, one of the classic vegetables, which is plant and and do the minimum of is cherry tomato. If you can have a vining cherry tomato growing on your balcony in your apartment in the city, then the actual maintenance required to help it grow is quite small, and yet you can harvest cherry tomatoes for several weeks, if not months, during the harvest season, and as you remove the fruits, then more flowers will come onto the vine, and you can extend that growing season. And likewise, I would have said that eggplant is a fairly tough operator. It doesn't require a great deal of maintenance, and yet has a very long fruiting season, which is appropriate for people who have busy lives and don't have the opportunity to spend hours working their allotment or their home garden every day. Jackie?
Yes, we work mostly with developing countries, with the very poor, and time may be less of an issue than in developed countries, but for everyone, I think it depends on the relative importance that you place on your diet and your nutrition. So I believe that everybody should, wherever possible, grow their own vegetables, if it's possible. The exercise that you get in growing the vegetables is great for you as well. But looking at what grows best, as a botanist, those crops that have originated where you are probably the easier ones to grow. The traditional crops, those will be less susceptible, mostly less susceptible to pests and diseases, and should grow fairly easily. They'll be adapted, and go along with what Dyno said, some crops are easier to grow. It depends on very much on where you are.
Ray, you also has a point to make.
Yeah, I add one more point. Yes, sometimes there's a trade-off that if we want to grow the foods in our garden, we need to spend some time. We also kind of measure that how many hours that the women in average can work in our gardens in order to able to supply about the 50 to 70% of the overall vegetable supply for the household. It's about 1 to 2 hours per day. So that's from the discussions with the women's groups, that is the manageable time. So this is the data we have.
Great, thanks to all three of you for answering that. The next question is, I think, one that Ray, you will be able to answer. The listener is interested in how much nutrition is lost when vegetables are dried, when they're preserved, and when they're preserved in different ways, and wants to know what are the best preservation techniques for making sure that nutrition in vegetables isn't lost.
Okay. So yeah, the questions was the best technologies that can preserve the foods to prevent the nutrient loss. Yes, there are many technologies, but I think it's more important question is what are technology adaptable and affordable to the people that they can apply for them. So far that I can say the freeze drying of the vegetables to dry the vegetables, it's the technologies that can prevent the nutrient loss. However, this is not affordable methodologies for at the household levels, especially for the lower income settings. So there are many methods. For example, people are using solar dryer, and people are even using the sunlight, and also the low inputs oven drying. However, again, I would say there's some trade-off. A lot of household women, they use sun dry because it is the maybe most low-cost way. But I would say the most of the micronutrients, especially the vitamins, they are almost gone. Still, there's some fibers left, that there are some minerals left. Basically, so far we use the low temperature, like 50 degree, that can dry vegetable for 1 or 2 days, that can produce very good quality and maintains very good vitamins content and as well as the mineral content. We're trying to kind of try to use the solar drying methods and with the temperature and see that how we can do use that. So there is no the best way, but probably would be more suitable way to do that.
Great, thank you. We have time for one more question, and it's actually a question I'm also very interested in and have discussed, I think, with all three of you before. Why isn't there more investment from the funding and donor communities into vegetable production? Why can't we get it through to those stakeholders that investing in vegetables is important, not just for nutrition, but for environmental sustainability and also economic profitability?
I think the answer to that question is that it's very complex, this situation for vegetables, and it's a very simple situation for staple cereals. It's a very emotive to argue that people will be hungry and therefore what they need is food to fill their bellies. And that means rice, and it means maize, and it means wheat. And most politicians, when they're concerned about these things, are really only interested in food security. But we also know that it is pointless in achieving food security if you don't also achieve nutritional security at the same time. If vegetables were a single commodity, I believe that it would be possible to attract more donor funding into research and development. But in truth, we're dealing with hundreds of different species, not only of fruits but of vegetables as well, and none of them in particular have a very high global market. That perhaps is not true for tomato. According to FAO, tomato is about the 8th most important commodity in terms of value worldwide, and in fact more valuable than in fact maize. And yet this is something that doesn't seem to register when it comes to allocating donor funds. So we believe that this remains a truism, that vegetables and fruits and many other types of research is underfunded. And we also believe that it is time that the old green revolution thinking was swept away, perhaps. And in fact, we have a slogan that says we don't need a green revolution now, we need a revolution with greens. And that in fact summarizes our position that more effort needs to be made now in these smaller, more minor commodities in order to be able to help human beings achieve balanced and sustainable diets. When you look at the huge amount of investment there is now in medical costs in terms of dietary-induced diseases worldwide, if only just a tiny fraction of that could be diverted into agricultural research, then I'm convinced that we could have a very substantial effect in terms of improving quality, reducing price, and making vegetables much more available. And I think that that would have a very positive effect on world dietary issues.
Thank you, Dyno. I think that's a great point to end today's webinar on. I can't really thank you all enough for participating. It's been a pleasure to hear from you. I also want to thank all of our participants who are listening this evening in the United States and elsewhere around the world. We will have the PowerPoint that you saw available as a link on our website, and we'll also have the recording of the webinar up in a few days. Thank you all again, and I'll look forward to having you all again on a future webinar. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.